Also important at the potlatch is the Tlingit dance blanket. This is one of the most prestigious and sumptuous objects created by Northwest Coast Indians. This is not really a blanket at all, but it's a great fringed robe. The Tlingits, in fact, have a word that translates to describe this object as fringe about the body. At the very edge of the blanket, there's long, very thick, very rich fringe, which enhances the movements of the wearer, who places this blanket over his body during the ritual performance of the potlatch. As the dancer moves, the fringe swirls and sways and enhances his movements. These blankets are famous creations by the Tlingit. The Tlingit are a subgroup of the Tlingit, and it's the Tlingit women who are very, very famous creators of these great blankets. They work, though, with their husbands. The men create patterns for these blankets on a pattern board, which the women follow. This is a classic example of the traditional division of labor which exists among Northwest Coast Indians. The blanket itself is made out of yellow cedar bark and mountain goat wool. The mountain goat wool is spun and it's dyed. This is a technical accomplishment, an amazing feat, in fact. It takes about 6 months to weave the blanket, but it also takes about 6 months just to create the fiber out of which the blanket is made. The very, very rich fringe around the edges can help us to see the materials that form a basis for the blanket. You can see the cedar bark core, and then around this core, the mountain goat wool is carefully wrapped. There's also an indication that our Tlingit weaver takes great pride in her accomplishment because this blanket traditionally is signed. And we can see the pattern of the signature in multiple colors off to the edges of the blanket. Typical of Tlingit blankets, this blanket is bordered with very strong yellow and black bands. This helps to frame the complex design and also helps to bring order to the abstract patterns that fill the blanket. This was worn high up on the back so that the central panel, which depicts the crest animal, would have been visible on the back of the wearer. Typical of these blankets, this is incredibly symmetrical, which also helps us to see that it's a very formal design. It's also very abstract, and every inch of the blanket has been filled. Tlingit blankets, in general, fill the entire space of the material. As we look at the finished product, it's difficult to identify the animal. It's easy to find the eyes, maybe the fins, maybe the tail or the feet of the animal, but it's hard to put all of these component parts together and actually interpret or read the animal. In fact, it was probably only the single owner who had this blanket who actually understood what we're looking at. What we can tell for certain, though, is that this is a crest animal, an image that reflects the family lineage. And we can be reminded of that by the overall shape of the blanket with its triangular form, which peaks down by the fringe. This actually echoes the shape of a house front. The house where the Tlingit or Tlingit clan would live was dominated by images that reminded everybody of their ancestry. The house posts inside as well as the totem poles outside. It was a reference to the family history and the lineage, and it shows up here as the very, very basic form of our image, the blanket. The Tlingit blanket is also a symbol of incredible wealth. It was an image of status, and it was also an image of prestige. As we look at the individual parts of this, it may not be the main face that we seem to be able to find easily in the center, which is actually the image we should be reading at all. Instead, as we begin to look at the component parts, we begin to see a larger face. Up at the top of the central panel of the blanket, for example, there are two large eyes. These large eyes help to make up a larger face. The band running above them may in fact actually be the tail of the animal. It is possible that this large face refers to a great killer whale, because in portions of this panel we can also find images that refer to the fins of the whale.